94?
Leo Hannan, sorry I didn't get that.
Oh right, thanks. Mr. Hannon, where were you born?
In Werribee, Victoria.
Right. And what year was that?
1923.
Right. And did you grow up in Redfern?
No, in Newtown.
Right. What age were you when you went there?
Oh, I was very young. I was about 5. Most of me adult life up to the 30s was spent in Newtown.
Right. Did you have any brothers and sisters?
2 brothers and a sister. Oh, and there was 2 babies died. But that was premature, you know, like as babies. So there was 2 brothers and a sister.
What are your earliest memories of Newtown?
The earliest memories of Newtown was, of course, you've got to associate the economic climate with the environment of the time. And the time I remember mostly vividly about it is the poverty. But this was common to Australia. Of course, we've got to touch on that because that's part of the Depression years, you know. And as a child, I can remember my father never got constant work. It was only he was digging drains in Centennial Park. Those ponds, a lot of those ponds were dug by people that were out of work. They used to get occasional work to go and do relief work, they used to call it. And that was, you know, because he had a family. If he didn't have a family, you didn't get much at all. In fact, you had to hit the road and jump the rattler and all that stuff, you know. And you didn't get a dole in those days. You got a dole in the form of food. So we used to get handouts. But my family was very lucky because my aunt happened to be one of the nuns of the Brown St. Joseph's, the Josephites. In fact, she was one of the ladies that nursed Mary McKillop when she was dying at North Sydney at the Mother House. So she was able to supply our family with clothes because St Vincent de Paul wasn't as big as it is now. And I remember as the youngest of the family getting the hand-me-downs from me brother's clothes, you know, to go to school. And that was an experience. But also I remember my father used to clean bricks. Like you'd do anything to get a shilling, as the money was in those days, you know. And he used to clean bricks and I used to go with him. And that was very hard work for very little money. But through my aunt I got onto a place in town, a wholesale butcher's. Sutton Forest was the name of it. And they were down at Central Railway, where the Her Majesty Theatre is now. That used to be the old Empire Theatre. And I used to get free meat, like the offcuts, you know, the stuff that the butcher thought wasn't too good. And I used to go down there. And then I used to go around the cake shops and we used to get stale buns and the specks from the Italians, you know, from the fruit shop. They'd give you the fruit that was... So my memories, as I said earlier, and this isn't self-pity, this is reality. And I'm not the only one. There was hundreds of thousands of people probably lived in same conditions in Footscray and Melbourne and other places where there was poverty. That was a bad time because the social services weren't as they are today, you know. There was no net, no safety net to catch the people. And families suffered, yeah.
How old were you when you were going around collecting?
I was from about 6 to 7. I remember doing those jobs. And there was a Mrs. Reed next door to us. We lived in a tenement house in Church Street, Newtown, and that was a double-storied house. And I used to go and pay. She was a very lazy woman, and they used to have lay-by. I used to go and pay her lay-bys. I was always an opportunist, you know, because poverty makes you... See, Charlie Chaplin said, and he was a billionaire when he died, the late actor, comedian, he said that he was brought up in an orphanage in London. And one of the things he mentions in his memoirs is the fact that once you've tasted the taste of poverty, you never forget it. Even though you know you can finish up in palaces, you never forget the cutting edge of poverty. And I've never forgotten it, to be quite frank. That's what makes me appreciate my life today, and it has for many years. You know, the things that we take for granted, you know, that are, you know, just to be able to eat good food and have a shower when you need it. Some of these things are important.
When you said you remembered poverty, that was the earliest sort of memory of Newtown. And you talked about your family's experience. How was the poverty evident in the suburb amongst other people?
Oh, very much, obviously.
In what ways?
Well, everybody was very competitive. I'd come home from school at 3 o'clock. First I went to the nuns at Camperdown, which was down the road from us, near Messeton Road. And then I'd go to the Brothers later on at 14. But at both schools I used to come home and had a four-wheel barrow, which is a thing you very rarely see today with kids. And I'd get me barrow and I'd race Tibby Hanshaw and Whopper Wessel. You like the names? That was their names. And I'd race them to the woodyard of Stewart Brothers, who had they were building contractors, and they had a big yard down there, English Street. And I'd race down, we used to get, where the saw works? They used to throw the offcuts of the wood in there. And I'd be racing them. I don't know whether that was me in particular, but it was general. People were competing with each other when things are tough, people compete. When there's no need to, people don't compete so much. But when there is a necessity, people compete.
Was it a vicious rivalry or a friendly rivalry?
Oh, no, underneath it was vicious. I was also a lolly boy at 14. Up at the local, pictures and ballroom dancing, which I had a lot to do with as a young fella, which I think is a pity it's died out. It was one of the best ways for the sexes to meet. And it's a strange paradox that in those days, I used to go to Petersham Town Hall and all those, this is later on of course, 17 or 18. You'd go to a dance in those days, and if you were drunk, which I used to starting to drink heavily then, you weren't allowed in with a bottle, or even if you were too drunk. But today, for a young person, they've got to go, for a gig, they've got to go into a pub. Like the thing has turned around, But I've always enjoyed it, and that's why I still like to watch the ballroom dancing. It's beautiful. It's very nice. But yeah, it was competitive.
Well, getting back to can you describe what kind of house did you live in?
Well, it's still there, 174 Church Street.
Right.
It's down past St Stephen's, the historic church, where the old graves of the seamen that was sunk off the Heads, I can't think of the name of the ship, they're buried there. But it was an old dump, and it's still there. Oh yeah, it wasn't a nice place. See, we ended up the luxuries, like for instance, we had chip eaters, or you boiled a copper. I can remember my mother ironing with a flat iron over a stove, and she used to heat you remember the old flat irons? They used to heat them on a stove. And she had to do a washing in a copper, and then they'd have a scrubbing board. You ever seen a scrubbing board? And after the scrubbing board, she'd be lucky. I remember when we first got a mangle, if you know what a mangle is. It's a thing that you put clothes through to get the bulk of the water out. And that was a big deal. And of course at my early age there was no radio. I remember when radio started to come in, and before we ever got a radio, before we could afford one, I had a crystal set as a young fella, which if you know anything about them, they're simple to build. All you need is a coil and a little crystal and a pair of headphones and a nerve, and you're in business.
Where did you buy the stuff from to make?
Well, you could get it from Mick Simmons and stuff like that. Mick Simmons were the big sports shops in those days. You could get the equivalent of. And then later on at 14 I got a job with Robbie Twyman. I can mention names, can't I? For Robbie, I wonder if he's still alive. He gave me a job on the ice cart. I used to do ice from McDonald and Eckland, who were up in Enmore, opposite where the Greek Theatre is now. That used to be a theatre. Well, at the back of a lane there was the ice works. And of a Saturday morning we'd get up at 4 o'clock at 14. And two of us would get on the back of a nice cart, and we'd go up and load tons of ice. And you had to deliver that by hand into flats and upstairs. And you had a bag, and you put the bag over the ice. There were shilling blocks and 50-cent blocks, like another price range. Two blocks of ice, different ranges.
Was that a horse-drawn cart?
No, this was a 1928 Chevrolet with a vacuum tank. Now a vacuum tank, see, I spent most of my life driving trucks. I can show you me evidence of that in a minute. But they had a vacuum tank which used to pull the petrol from the petrol tank at the back up to the engine, and then it ran into a little tank, like a holding tank, and then into the carburettor. Well, one morning up there, a bloke had a load of ice on, and he started looking around his engine with a match, and the vacuum tank went up. And these trucks were built of wood. You know, they had, and they used to do terrific sign writing. You never see the sign writing you used to see, like milk carts. Like you never see milk. In this flat, you might have noticed outside little boxes. Those boxes were originally built for milkmen, but milk's not delivered by bottle now. You buy your milk at the supermarket. But in those days, milk came around bulk. It wasn't in bottles. It used to be in cans, and they used to pull the milk with like a 6-pint container, and they'd run to your house and you'd leave a jug out, and you'd write on how much you wanted, a pint or a quart, and you'd leave the money. And some of the local alkies used to put a bit of colour into it. They'd come around and steal the money. That was a very common practice in those days, you know. So, and in the winter, the same bloke, Robbie Twyman, on the same truck, we used to do wood, coal and coke. And of a night after school, I'd go down, and I look at young people today, they got it so easy. I used to go down and chop wood and bag it with Ernie Henshaw. And then we'd get into the coal. We'd have a couple of ton of coal from White Bay. Down White Bay used to be where the coal come in. And I'd go into the yard and I'd get the shovel and we'd get stuck into it at 14. But I was very fit. And I don't think hard work ever killed anybody. And I think it gave me a great advantage later on because I work with my body. I'm never a brain worker. I never had the capacity. But if you develop a strong body, you can always get a quid, I found. And that was the basis of that lot, yeah.
What sort of family did you come from when your parents came up from Victoria? What was your father doing?
Well, my father was an alcoholic who never knew it. And my mother was a religious fanatic. And it was a good affiliation. We had more pictures than the Vatican in my house. But Mum was a sincere Christian, and I've never doubted her faith. She had great faith. I can remember as a child, she was walking through Oxford Street, and I was a kid, and very young, so young that it's, you know, just that I remember the incident. And she saw a picture of the Christ, and it was one with the thorns, and she reckoned she could see tears in the eyes, you know. Well, you know, I don't know, maybe she saw tears. Who's to say? But she was very bigoted, I'm afraid to say, unfortunately. It's terrible when you get older, you realise sometimes your parents weren't perfect. But then I'm not perfect, so, you know, that squares it up, doesn't it?
In what way was she bigoted?
Oh, she was strange. She used to say to us, you know, you can't play with the other kids. You know, there was kids of other denominations in the street, I won't mention them, because it's not a problem in Australia, that sectarianism now. There was sectarianism in my day.
She was Catholic?
Yes. And she was a bigot. There's no doubt about that. She blamed it all on Henry VIII.
And what about your father?
Well, he was a practicing alcoholic and he died at the age of 55. Very prematurely. Died in his sleep. Leaking valve of the heart. But I think it was alcohol inspired. He was a man I was never close to. I missed him as a father figure. Well, I mean, he was a strict disciplinarian. But then he was sick, see, as I was later to get sick with alcohol. So was he. And alcoholics are not nice to live with. We don't make ideal parents. You know, leaves a lot to be desired. The last, the lost and the least.
And how did your mother cope with his alcoholism?
Well, she prayed. And what she used to do down at St Joseph's Church in Camperdown, I can still remember the old priest, Monsignor Doherty, or Father Doherty as he was then. And Mum used to get Dad and drag him down to missions. I don't know if you know what a mission is, do you? Catholics have them. They were in those days. They don't have them today so much, you don't see them. Because there was no TV and no radio. So they dragged Dad down to a mission, and they'd have these Jesuits or one of the Dominican orders, and they were fire-eating missionary priests. And they used to talk about hell and damnation, you know. And you'd shudder just listen to them, you know. It was frightening. They went on the old fear. See, there's a lot of, in Catholicism, there's a lot of guilt and fear that's installed into you, you know what I mean? There's a lot of good things with it too, but there's a lot of negativity too. But of course, unfortunately, what you are brought up to, you die. You know, because I think this is part of being whatever you are. So you can't pick your parents, and you can't pick your religion. See? But you can change your religion. It's very difficult to change your relatives.
Did it cause a lot of
Friction?
yeah.
Oh yeah, there was fights, arguments, bit of violence occasionally. I have memories as a real young child of, in those days there was razors were used as a form of getting over the top of other people. I remember my father had a friend who drank, and this night, late, not in the afternoon, they were talking about 5 o'clock, somebody got slashed with a razor and I seen him. And he was laying there. He didn't die, but he had a terrible cut. And I can see the blood still today, you know.
Was that in the street in Newtown?
In the street in Newtown, yeah. Oh yeah, it was a pretty tough suburb, you know, in the old times. But there were tough police in them days. You know, this was before the do-gooders got hold of the law and changed it so that there's no discipline within society now. Anything goes now, and of course there's this diminished responsibility. In those days you were responsible. I can remember as a young teenager, I had a very bad way of talking to young girls. You know, I used to give them, proposition them straight out. And I was saying to this girl this night, and there was 2 coppers in Newtown, Long Tack Sam and Gorilla. God love them, I hope they're dead around now because I don't want them coming back to see me. And they stepped out of the shadows of the post office and grabbed me. In those days, coppers used to kick you. You know what I mean? And sometimes beat you up if you were drunk enough, like, you know. But you had to provoke them. And I was a great provoker, you know what I mean? I wasn't a nice person when I drank, because later on, as I'm telling you earlier, I did develop my own alcoholism. So I can't throw too many brickbats, you know. But getting back to my parents, yeah, that was a point of attention, yeah.
Was your father politically involved at all?
Yeah, he was a bit of a... His father had been Irish, and they'd come out from Ireland, and he was a bit of a Sinn Féiner, you know. IRA man, they're mad murderers. But we were brought up on that rubbish, you know. For a long time I believed it, you know. And I had prejudices, which I finally got rid of after I got out into the world and found out the realities of what it's all about. There's nothing worse than a bigot, there's nothing more sick. And violence to me, I don't think ever solved anything. It's the point of last return, you know. So yeah, he was that's, you know, he'd get maudlin drunk and he'd sing Irish rebel songs and all that rubbish they go on. And
you know, his mate that got, was it his mate that got slashed with the razor?
Yeah.
Was that just a robbery, or was that?
No, they were criminals. See, you associated, well, there were people that in our street that used to go to jail. And probably this still happens. I mean, human nature doesn't change. I mean, there's still criminals around here. I could take you around here. I know a fella in this building that's been up for attempted murder.
What sort of crime, what sort of criminals were they? Were they...
Oh, they weren't big time. They weren't your Christopher Scases or your Bonds. I hope I'm not dropping names here. They were second story men. Reagan enters, you know, and
would they stand
there wasn't
over...
the muggings there was then that there is today. There wasn't so much of that stuff. It was more break and enter and steal, break into factories.
Was it in your neighbourhood? Did they break in and rob?
Not so
neighbours?
much, no, because who had anything to steal in Newtown?
Yeah,
You go to the plush suburbs like Epping, or some of these nicer suburbs, you know. No, Double Bay, you know, Double Bay, or down to. You go where the money is. That's what they asked Willie Sutton in America. You know why he robbed banks? The FBI asked him, and he said because that's where the money is.
Did your father have mates around where he talked politics and...
Oh, he was a mad political. He was a Labor
left-wing?
man.
A
Labor, you know. Well, that was left of centre then. There's no Labor Party now.
What about, was he involved in any of the anti-eviction campaigns?
Oh yeah, he used to get into all that sort of stuff, yeah.
What can you remember of that?
Well, I don't remember a lot of it because I didn't take much interest in politics at that stage. But I remember he used to go out and the police used to come. They were terrible times. They used to evict families. And
Did you witness an eviction?
I've seen evictions, yeah.
What happened? Can you describe one?
Well, they'd be given so much time on a court order, and if they didn't adhere to that, the police would come down and they would put all the furniture out in the street, and the people too. They'd physically evict you, and there was no beg your pardon about it. And there was no Big Brother system, you know. Like if that happened today, there'd be, shooting in the street.
Did you witness any of the blockades that the Communist Party organised to try and stop the eviction?
Oh yeah, there was all that. But at that stage of my political education, I wasn't aware of the communist element. I mean, I was always identified as working class.
Was your
There
dad
was
a
a
communist?
I think he was a half-baked communist. I think he was, at heart, a communist, yeah.
There was an unemployed workers movement, was he?
Oh yeah, the Workers of the World, wasn't it?
Oh no, that's World War One.
No.
Wobblies.
No.
No, the unemployed workers movement, which organised the.
Oh no, I don't think he was. I don't think he was involved in that part of it.
No.
He wasn't a great. See, you remember when he was out battling to get a quid, as it was in them days.
How did he do that? How did he?
Well, he took all sorts of jobs that other people wouldn't do.
Like what?
Well, cleaning up backyards, and I remember one stage he was selling the Jackson kettle, which was a strange kettle. It used to have pipes underneath it. And he used to get all sorts of things, you know, where you get a franchise, you know, from little firms in those days, and you got to walk 400 mile a day, and you'd make about 50 cents on a kettle, you know what I mean? Like there was nothing easy about it. And there was different capers. He was always getting onto these, he's going to make $1 million, you know, and they were terrible schemes, you know.
So he kept trying.
Oh, he was a trier. God, he was a real trier.
Well, so his alcoholism didn't stop him working.
Oh no, he wasn't a bum. But
Did he provide well?
he done his best. I make no moral judgment on him because he was dealing with a disease which he didn't know he had, which today is well known as a disease, and he did the best he could in his conscience. So he never left us. There was one stage in Victoria, I believe my elder brother knows more about this than I do, where we lived in a tent. So you got to be going pretty bad to live in a tent. There was Happy Valley, you know about that, don't you?
Where was that exactly?
That was out of La Perouse. That's where the unemployed set up a humpies, you know.
Did you ever go there?
No, we always managed to get, mainly through my aunt, through the works of my aunt. She was a good Christian, and we always managed to get, see, housing was cheap, but then nobody had much money anyhow. I remember 16 shillings a week we were paying at one stage, which wasn't a lot of money. But then you didn't get a lot of money, like the basic wage was about £5 or something. You could walk into town when I was 21, and if you looked in a shop window, the tailor would come out and pull you in by the shirt tails, and they'd give you an extra pair of trousers and a watch with a suit. You know, like it was real competitive, real cutthroat. Of course, everybody was feeling the effects of the Great Depression.
Well, when you were 21, that would have been in the 40s.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even then, it was that competitive in the 40s.
Well, see, at 18 I went in the army.
Right.
So I was called up.
What sort of discipline was used in your family?
Well, physical, belts.
One or two, or with a strap, or
Straps, yeah.
who administered it?
Well, I got to be honest, my mother was sometimes the worst culprit. She had a foul temper. Of course, she had Irish blood too. They don't seem to be a very peaceable people, you know. And she'd. But then I was a very willful child. I was a willful teenager and a willful adult, you know. So a lot of the stuff I did bring on myself. I got no doubt about that.
Can you remember any incidences?
Well, I remember once my father, I got a belting off him once. He used to get on the booze, and Sunday morning he'd be very sick with the grog, and he'd be trying to sleep it off. And he used to wear big number 8 boots. You don't see boots now, do you? Lace-up boots. And he used to wear these. Oh, there's a photo of me father just here. There he is there. Do you want to see it?
We'll put a shot of that on later.
Yeah. And he used to sleep of a Sunday morning, to recover from the alcohol. And me and my brother used to sneak in and tie his bootlaces together. And this morning he caught me. And he was in a foul mood.
Was he wearing his boot?
Oh, no, he didn't need to. No, he wouldn't kick you. But he had this strap, and them big straps. And boy, was he an expert. And oh yeah, it was damned hard physical punishment.
But it didn't make you be good?
No, that you still take the risk. See, I was a player, You're still going to take a risk, And there's a certain thrill in the fact that the danger of anything adds a zest to it, The things that we're forbidden to do is, I'll tell you one subject, can I speak about it? Sex. We never knew a thing about sex. At least I didn't. Nobody told me anything. The only sexual, I got to mention that because it's a human part of nature, was when I went to school. And I was going to fight a bloke. In fact, it was on the ice cart one morning. I was going to fight the bloke, Ernie Henshaw. I was going to fight him. He told me I came from his mother. And that's how dumb I was. Now, you wouldn't think anyone, I'm not,
How old were you?
I was about 12. And I had no idea of nature and birth or anything like that. Oh, everything was, the stork and the angels,
And he told you came from your mother?
Yeah, and I wanted to fight him. I said, what are you talking about, come from your mother? I had no idea of birth. But I want to mention that because it illustrates the poverty of the education we got, That,
and what was some of the other things that you used to get a hiding for? What was considered?
Oh, you couldn't take our Lord's name in vain, like blasphemy. Swearing was forbidden. What else? Oh, there was a few other things. Borrowing stuff off your brothers, using gear that didn't belong to you. My brother had a bike and I used to borrow it without permission. And I'd get a belting for that. But there were a number of things. But then I got by because I soon learned that if you helped them economically, you got brownie points, And as I say, I used to get that wood, coal and coke job, and I can remember once the horror I had. My father used to collect prickly pear from a lady down the street, and he used to put it into, you don't see kerosene tins now. There were a lot of kerosene used in those days, in paraffin lamps and stuff like that. And I remember he used to collect the prickly pear, and they used to boil it and use it for arthritis. Have you heard of that? No, prickly pear, you ask some of the older people. Prickly pear is a good thing for some medical conditions.
The fruit?
Beg your pardon?
The fruit of the prickly pear or the flesh leaves?
The flesh, the whole bit. Right. They put it in a can and they heat it. And you boil it and you get the syrup off it, the soup off it. And my dad used to collect it and sell it. And I remember he got the money off this lady and he used to go straight to the wine bar. And there were a lot of wine bars about. You don't see wine bars. Wine bars have gone up market now. These days were the fourpenny darks. You know about them? Like, wine that was, it's the heavy red was called a fourpenny dark. Fourpence. You could get drunk for 2 bob practically. My father used to get 50 cents off this lady, and the lady gave it to me. You know the way women will do patronising when there's a child present? And I run straight home and give it to Mum. But that's how I knew that if he got it, it was gone. Well, I got a nice belting off him later over that. But it was disguised, You're still awake up even as a child when things are happening,
You got a hiding for something else, but you knew it was for that.
Yeah, it was the other. Yeah, it was a front. Yeah. Yeah. So, but.
What was the difference between a wine bar and a pub?
Well, there was a social difference. See, wine today is sociably accepted. Even the in crowd today Like, I've worked for some big bosses. I've been truck driver most of my life. At one stage I worked for Mr. Murdoch. I was working at the Mirror Garage. And I used to drive his car, you know, the big shot now that's in America. And he has a beautiful home at Vaucluse, and it's got one of those lifts that go up to the place, you know. But they drink wine, you know, as though it's, you know, part of everyday life. But in my day, wine was for the unemployed, the no-hopers, what do you call the no-hopers, you know. The alcoholics, really. And there was this social chasm, you know, between, like beer was considered a man's drink, you know, there was cricketers and footballers outside pubs, you know, like, you know, the old advertising I'm talking about. And it was considered, it wasn't considered improper to drink beer. But wine was, you know, you were sort of a little off the social calendar if you drank wine. Particularly, you know, Plonky Joe, you know. That wasn't considered the in thing. But beautiful day, eh?
Yeah.
I think we've got the spring now. Ace. Oh, I better not mention that. All right. How do you like me thermometer? Look at this. That's a pretty girl.
Is that?
Oh, that's my niece.
Oh, right.
Remember the earthquake?
Yeah.
That's when I was just in AA. It's me mother.
Oh, just a minute. Stop. When you were a child, you know, getting back to your family life, were your parents warm towards you? Were they?
Oh yes, I always believed they loved me. My mother was a very emotional woman. She'd cry at the drop of her hat.
They affectionate?
They weren't touching. Mum, I know, felt a lot of affection, but she wasn't a touching person. You couldn't, which I am by nature. I like body contact with people I love, you know. But there wasn't a lot of that, no. There wasn't a lot. And Dad, very cold. Yeah.
Was he cold towards her?
I think so. I'm not, she being the youngest, I'm not too sure about that. But I don't think there was they seemed to be strangers at times, yeah. There seemed to be a, you know, big gulf at times, I don't know. Perhaps that's my perception of reality, I don't know.
But they stayed together?
They stayed, but in those days, economically, women didn't, see today a woman can walk away and the social service and everything, they got to, you know, walk upstart. In those days there was no safety net for women to take free kids and go. Because where would she go? She had nowhere to go. There wasn't the social service, you couldn't get the widow's pension, there'd be no income.
Do you think she would have left if she could have?
I think on occasion there were, yeah. I think a lot of women would have left in those days. See, women didn't have the rights they got now. You know, which are not privileges, rights. They had no outlet. And you had to cop it.
How were you expected to contribute toward the family?
I had to pay board when I went to work.
From what age?
14, I went down to the department. You had to go in those days, you had to get a permit to start work at 14. And the Department of Labour and Industry was the name of it. And it's down at George Street North in a building behind the old Maritime Service building. It's where they do the licences for yachts and motorboats now. Of course, I've been there for people on Garden Island when I worked there. And that's where you went. And they just interviewed you and gave you a stamp, you know. And then I got a job through my aunt. This aunt keeps popping up again, like a spectre. A spectre that walks the earth.
Was she a nice aunt?
Oh, very loving. But also very, very strict in her own way. I think she'd have been a strict disciplinarian. But there was a tender side to her, yeah. But she, I suppose, she was in a girls' orphanage, St Martha's, out at Lewisham. They're still out there on Taverners Hill. But they're college now, training, TAFE. The whole St Martha's is gone. And they had a lot of girls to look after, you know, so homeless kids. So I suppose they, you know, you get indoctrinated with, they're like army officers, you know, the feminine Nazis.
Was she your father's sister or your mother's sister?
That was my mum's sister.
So your mum grew up in an orphanage as well?
No, mum was brought up in a family, large family, Rogans.
So how was it that her sister got?
A nun.
Yeah.
Oh, well, a very Catholic family.
No, but how was it that she was raised in an orphanage?
Say again, which
Sorry,
one?
I thought you said the sister who was a nun.
No, she worked in an orphanage.
Oh, worked in an orphanage.
Yes, St Martha's was a girls' orphanage.
Oh, I see. I thought you
Sorry.
said she was raised.
Sorry, I slurred my words, yeah.
No.
Excuse me. No, she worked in an orphanage, yeah.
And she'd find work or look after your family?
Where she could, she personally helped us, I know that. She brought a lot of food and parcels that she'd get, you know, odd things, clothes for the girls.
Would your mum go and ask her for help?
I don't think Mum had to ask her. They were sisters. There was a good bond in family orientation. There was a resentment by my mother against the other sisters who'd married well. When I say married well, in the Depression, if you married somebody that was in a government job and had secure, you know, not rich, but secure pay, you know what I mean? And that money was there every week, that was considered making a good marriage. Like, you didn't have to have the BMW as you got to do today and live at Point Piper. But if you had somebody in a government job, say, if you weren't on relief, you know, that was a good marriage. And they weren't alcoholics. So a lot of my relatives, I don't think I'll name them. They might see this. They made good marriages, you know, what was considered good by that standard of the day.
And they didn't help the family?
Well, I mean, people weren't that well endowed that they could be that charitable, you know what I mean? It wasn't a matter of not wanting to help, you know, but they couldn't. I mean, they had their own families, they had large families to raise, you know, so that, you know, it wasn't easy for them. Nobody had it easy, unless you were rich, and maybe you had it easy then, I don't know. Of course, there were still rich people and poor people, as there'll always be.
But when you were a child, before you went off to work, you mentioned before about going and collecting wood and meat. Was that, did you do that because you wanted to do it, or were you expected to go and do what you could? Because I know there must have been a lot of factories around Newtown,
Heaps.
and so there would have been opportunities to get offcuts or scraps or things from them. I mean, were you expected to sort of do it?
Yeah, everybody did it where they could.
And so can you tell me some of the places you went to or what you did?
Well, again, I'm only reiterating what I've already said, that
right.
it was mainly cake shops.
Oh, right.
Up the road, you'd go to the cake shop. There was a cake shop down the road where they used to make wholesale cakes.
What was that called, do you know?
Oh, I can't remember the name of it, but you'd get cakes there, stale cakes. When something, you know, or they dropped a cake or something, you know, it was squashed.
And they were happy to give you some...
Well, it was stuff they couldn't sell. Oh, there was one place it's marvellous when you talk about how it all comes back. One place after school I used to go for wood was, it was opposite St Joseph's Camperdown. It was Wood Coffles Funerals, and they used to make the coffins. And I used to go into the factory. This is a fact, I'm not telling you a lie. It was in Missenden Road, or off Missenden Road rather, at the back of a factory that adjoins Parramatta Road now. And I'd go in there and you'd see them doing the upholstery in the coffins. You know, of course this is very intriguing when you're about 9. Of course you don't even, you know, deaf's something you don't even think about, you know, it happens to old people. And I used to go in there, deaf's never worried me much. Once it's not happening to me anyhow. But yeah, that was a curious place. But I used to get some good wood there, yeah.
You need a lot of wood with
well, everything was wood burning, coppers, and we had wooden grates where we had fires in the house.
What do you mean?
Well, we used to have a fire. We had a fireplace. And you'd have a wood fire.
Oh, yes.
And the coal, I used to get a bit of Coke and coal off Robbie. You know, Bobby, I was telling you about the bloke I work for. I'd bring a bit of coal home and we'd get a, you know, fire. See, everyone sort of put a little bit in where they could. You know what I mean?
And none of the shops felt like if they gave you something, then they were doing themselves out of a sale.
No, people knew the poverty.
They knew that if you couldn't buy it at any...
Well, people knew what it was about. It wasn't confined to one area. The whole of Australia, it's like the drought at the moment. The whole of Australia was suffering, and in a hell of a way.
Okay, what did your family do for fun?
Well, my father drank, my mother went to church, I went to the movies as a kid. So you get into the pictures for sixpence. You could see 2 movies. I remember seeing Gunga Din, and when I first developed a love for music, was the first time I heard the 1812 Overture. And there was a conductor at the Regent Theatre, and his name was Jan Rubini. And he had a full orchestra. And there was a second movie and a newsreel on for sixpence or something. And you got a full, at intervals you got a, or either that, if you didn't get a full orchestra playing the 1812 Overture or something akin to it, you got an organ recital, like at the Capitol or the Lyric.
Where were these cinemas?
Oh, they were all over the city.
So you'd go into the city for them? Not at, they weren't
Oh, there was
Newtown.
local theatre too.
Oh, yeah, what were
Oh,
they?
yeah. Well, in Newtown there was the Hoyts, which is now the Library of Newtown, if you know, do you know Newtown Library, where it is? It's in King Street. And it's up near the Shakespeare Hotel. And there was the Enmore Theatre, which is now a Greek community theatre. A lot of these have been turned into supermarkets and lots of places. Like, you know, up at, this is deviating a bit, you know, up at Taylor Square, you know, South Dowling Street, you know, St Vincent's Private Hospital, where you come across that.
Oh, yes.
Well, you know that Greek community centre?
Oh, yes.
That used to be a theatre.
Right.
And at Bondi Junction you got, I'm getting a bit off the beam, aren't I, here?
It's okay. Well, at the local theatres, did they have organists or orchestras, or was that mostly for this in the city?
No, that was mainly in the city a lot, the orchestras and the organists.
And how would you get in there to the city?
Well, you get in there for a penny or twopence.
On a tram?
On a tram. You ever rode a tram? Marvellous things. You just sit sideways, facing each other.
And at what age were you allowed to go there by yourself?
Oh, as a kid, see, I was one of the kids in the family that contributed. And when you contribute economically, you get certain privileges.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? Because, you
Was that
know...
spelled out to you, or it just happened?
No, that wasn't said. That was automatic reflex.
Right.
You know, you sort of... Mum appreciated. See, I used to give her most of me money, with the exception of a few bob. Say to go to the pictures, I'd give her half of me money that I earned would be 50 cents. I'd give half of her that.
That would have been after you were 14?
After I was 14, yeah.
And when you were a younger kid, you'd collect things and what have you?
Yeah, I collected bottles and...
So that, would you pay for your own way into the movies, or would she give you the money?
No, I'd pay my own way in. Yeah. And I used to go to the Speedway too, that was a great thing.
What was that?
Well, that was motorbikes and midget cars. The Empire Speedway, you've never probably heard of it, have you?
No.
Taylor and the other guy that used to run it. It used to be on a Saturday night, and...
Where was it?
It was in the showground. And it was a thrilling spectacle, you know, the old J.A. Presswick, they used to call them jet bikes. They're a racing bike.
How old were you when you went there?
Oh, this is when I was about 12, 14.
Oh yeah, and...
Saturday night I'd go out and it was something, you know, they still had those lights there, you know, the 4 big lights that they light up the arena with. But then when they put the race on, they'd dim it, and the only lights that'd be on would be the track lights. And they'd bring them up to a barrier. Have you seen dirt track racing? In England at Shepherd's Bush, I think they still do it. And that was a thing I followed, I was real keen on.
Did you have favourite drivers? And...
Oh, I used to take my mum out. And she used to love it. She was a very emotional woman. She used to love certain riders like Bluey Wilkinson. who was one of the greatest riders in Australia at that time on that particular sport, and Vic Duggan, and she just liked the way they wore their scarf. They all used to wear levers and a helmet, and she was really enthralled by, you know, like all women, she was a bit soft, and she'd be wrapped in, you know, one particular bloke, you know, for some reason, I don't know. But that's the way it was, yeah, that was a good night out.
You used to take her?
Yeah, I used to go with my mum, yeah.
Did you take your dad as well?
No, Dad was never interested.
Did you ever do anything as a family?
No, not with the exception of that with my mother, occasional theatre. No, not, we never, well, occasionally we went to the beach.
Which beach?
From there we used to go over to Rockdale, what is it, Cronulla, isn't it? Cronulla.
How would you get there?
We get a train.
Did your parents ever have a car?
Never. Never had. Not too many people had cars then, but there were some exceptions. But we weren't in the car class.
You know, in your family in the evening, say, you know, after, what did you call your evening meal? Was it tea or dinner?
That was tea.
Tea. So after tea,
Ah.
what did you do?
Overnight, I was a great reader.
So would you all sit in the lounge room and...
Oh no, it was a large house. Me and the two brothers, we had one room between two of us. Bill slept on his own and Leo had a room. No, there's about 5 or 6 rooms. No, we had plenty of room in that house.
So you'd go to your bedroom?
Go to your room, yeah. Well, normally, yeah. Or sometimes you'd sit up, or sometimes you'd go out. We used to make a lot of fun. See, in those days, like today, kids have got arcades they can go into. We didn't have that. We had to make our fun. Like you'd go out and play in the street.
But as an under 10-year-old, will you be allowed to do that?
Oh yeah, yeah.
In summer?
Well, you know, Sydney, I'm talking about now, Newtown, was a lot of safer place than it is now. I can remember sleeping with a window open downstairs. You wouldn't do that today unless you're crazy in Newtown or anywhere else.
But
You've got to be careful.
But in the winter, if it was cold, wouldn't it be cold in your rooms? Was the family ever around together in a room? Like, did you play cards?
Oh yeah, cards were very popular with the older people, with my parents. They used to play cards and they'd have people in. See, people used to visit in them days.
Yeah.
Relatives, see, Auntie Grace or Auntie Lou or one of the others had come over.
Did they?
Or people down the street had come up.
Did they live nearby, your relatives?
Yeah, not far away.
So there was a lot of family contact?
There was a lot of family. So you see, there was a lot of people contact because people had no diversion. There was no radio at the time I'm talking about now, in my parents' life at that stage.
1930s we talking?
Yeah, 1930s. There was no radio, no TV, and there wasn't much in town. So people made their own fun. And the way they made it was cards and stuff like that, you know.
Did you have a piano?
No, but the lady next door did. She had a pianola, not a piano. I used to get in and bang the pianola. You ever played a pianola? Great experience. I used to sit there and go with the feet on the rails. I always liked music and books.
So in the winter you would read or what have you, and then in summer?
I was a beach man. Coogee Beach was the one I used to go to.
In the evenings?
Oh, not in the evenings. Well, there wasn't a lot to do in the evening, as I say. You know, you could go out and play for a while. You had to be in by about 9 o'clock.
What did you play if you were going and playing? Where did you play outside?
Well, in the street.
Right.
There was nowhere else to play. There was no police boys club at that stage.
Did you play cricket or what?
Well, we
did you
play under the light. You could play cricket. Yeah, I remember playing cricket and handball up against the side of the factory. Stuff like that. And the girls used to play hopscotch a lot. You remember hopscotch? Did they still play that, I wonder? I don't know.
Yeah.
But it was very popular in my day.
You had a big house.
Yeah.
Which presumably you were renting it.
Renting, yeah.
Yet your family couldn't afford a radio.
Well, at that stage there were no radios.
In the 30s?
Well, there were no... radio was considered a luxury. Radio, you see, today people just, you know, they got 5 radios in one house, where among my relatives now. I got about 4 radios here. In those days, a radio was considered, I remember our first radio. I remember the salesman used to come to the house. In those days, not like today, you buy a TV, now you take it from home. You've got to find, or they'll send it. But in those days, you used to get things on loan, on approval.
Right.
And I remember we got this radio.
How old were you?
I must have been about 12. And but you see, you know, that was a fortune. You know, you got to remember that, you know, it wasn't easy.
Most of the time that we're talking about is really the late 20s,
30s.
into the 30s. It's really those depression years, isn't it?
Yeah.
The depression started around 28.
That's right.
Okay.
Oh yeah, it was worse in the earlier stage of my life, which I can only remember snippets of, you know.
It was what?
My brother can remember, my eldest brother can remember more than I can.
But it was, did you say it was worse in your early years?
It was worse because in the 20s was worse. As the 30s started to progress, things started to pick up.
Yeah. You know when your father was working,
Aye.
where, was it local, in Newtown, or did he travel to get to work?
Well, he used to go around the area, he'd go travelling, yeah.
But he never really had a steady, when did he get a steady job?
Well, he was a postman for a while. He got on the postal service. But I think the grog. See, my mother was a great one for the great pretender. You know, everything was, you must keep up a front. And you mustn't talk to the neighbours or the other kids you play with about things like what you hear at home stays at home. And I think her circumstances were such, the weight of his sickness, his alcoholism, made it such that she tried to keep a good image to her sisters, mainly, to keep up the pretense. So there was a lot of covering up. Like, you know, you never talked about certain subjects.
Like what?
They were taboo. Well, you know, grog and fights and stuff like that. Nothing that happened at home went outside the house. You had to keep up the, you know, everything's okay. And everything wasn't okay, of course.
How did you feel about that?
Well, I was confused at times. And I think a lot of what, and I'm not being exclusive or self-pitying, but I think a lot of what happens as a child has a bearing on your attitude as you grow up. But then again, it's neurotics, rearing neurotics, isn't it? So, you know, I suppose we're all a bit neurotic, aren't we? Even you and I. Nobody's perfectly sane.
Can you describe your mother's working day?
Well, in part, yeah. Well, it was a fairly hard life for a woman, as I said earlier. You know, the washing. Monday was always washing day, and there were no hills hoists. There were clotheslines and pegs. And before we got a mangle, I can remember the Acme was the name of the mangle we got. But before we got that, it used to be fun. You know, it was a big wash. But she was always a marvellous washer.
How would she go about that? Light up the copper? Or?
Light the copper. She'd light the copper. She'd chop the wood.
And how would she fill it up with water?
Fill it with water and then
Buckets?
Buckets, yeah. And then she'd have 2 troughs. Do you know what a trough is?
Trough?
Like a trough, you know, 2 troughs. You know the trough type thing made of concrete? Troughs they used to call them. And one would have cold water, one would have hot, and she'd bring the stuff out. I used to use blue. Do you know what blue is?
Reckitt's blue.
Reckitt's blue. Yeah, and she'd done a marvellous job. Can I interweave this with what my social life later on at the age of about 17, about 16, when I first started going dancing. All the girls used to remark about my collars, and my brother used to come with me. Our collars and ties were perfect. See, everyone wore a tie. You know, see, in the 2030s, you got to remember, you ever see old newsreels? You see a shot of Randwick Racecourse, you'll see everybody, all the men wearing a hat. Everyone wore a hat. I still wear hats, see, I still got to have it up there. But in those days, hats were, and collar and tie, you know, you went out socially, you had to have a collar and tie on, you know, even in the middle of summer. A summer's night, but you're thinking ought to be 100, you'd be going to a dance and you have a collar and tie and a suit on. Crazy.
Okay, so on Mondays was wash day.
Monday was wash day, yeah.
What time would her day start? What time would she get up?
Well, she'd get up early in the morning. She'd be up around 6.
Mm-hmm.
And she'd get us all out of bed. She was, see, I got to remember that my mother was the mother and father of our family. Geez, I hope my brothers don't see this. Because I'm telling it as it was. And she was the backbone of the family. She got us out of bed. And
When you got up, would the fire be lit, the stove?
Oh yeah, she had a fuel stove. Oh, I forgot about that.
Mm.
You just reminded me, yeah. Yeah, be a fuel stove and the porridge and stuff like that.
Oh, you'd have a hot breakfast?
Hot breakfast, yeah. And
Were you, I presume you were clean and well dressed to go to school?
oh yeah, she always put on a front. I might have mentioned that.
Mm.
She always gave us clean clothes and socks and, you know.
Mm.
See, in those days, if you dress shabby, people are terrible, and particularly children, are terrible judges.
Even in Newtown, where everybody was suffering a lot of poverty?
Yeah, but there was still that, you had to keep the front up. People are terrible at putting on the front, you know, like...
Was your mother a snob?
Yeah, but a poverty, a poor snob.
Did she look down on others? Or did she have empathy for them?
No, she was... No, I don't think she actually looked down on people. But she was jealous. She resented her lot. I know that. It's terrible to be married to a drunk and also to be poor. They're probably two of the classical sins, you know. I don't think anybody would be happy in that situation, not even Diana. You know. I'm mentioning names, I'm sorry.
And were there other days in the week allocated for special things, like Monday was wash day?
Well, see, not only that, I've forgotten it now, but Mum was a very practising Catholic. And practising Catholics, there's something every bloody day. There's the saint of the impossible. Did you know there's a saint of the impossible they pray to? St Jude, the saint of the impossible. Like if you got something impossible, you pray to St Jude. Doesn't say you're going to get an answer, but you can pray to him. But there was Ash Wednesdays and there was holy days and holidays. That's where I got brassed off with religion.
Did you celebrate all those days?
Well, you either did or, you know, I mean, you know, I had no option about, at a certain stage in my life, about whether I celebrated or not. I had to.
There'd be holy days of obligation. Where
Holy days of obligation. There was Friday you couldn't eat meat. And I love meat, that's why I got a bad heart now.
Did you go to benediction as well as Mass?
I love benediction. Of all, I saw a show the other night on Compass about Evensong, which is an Anglican church function. And it's a beautiful, there's something about the evening, the close of the day, and the candles. And I don't know, have you ever been to benediction? Have you seen the lights and the vestments? And the beautiful, there's a beautiful feeling, you know what I mean? And it must have been spiritual, because I wasn't very spiritual. I've not been a very spiritual man in my life. I'm a hedonist. I believe in what I see, what I feel, what I smell.
The incense at benediction?
The incense, and it's a beautiful little church, Camperdown. You had the picture of the Madonna on one side, in the lights. Hey?
What church was it?
St Joseph's, Camperdown. If you're ever down that way, have a look. And then you got the Christo on the other side. And you got, in those days, of course, the Mass was celebrated with the churches, with the priest back to you. The day it's celebrated. And when they went from Latin, that's not the same, I don't think. But anyhow, that's my opinion. I don't think that'll shake Rome.
Okay. Now, let's talk about some of your friends. Who were your friends?
My neighbours were my friends and the kids I went to school with.
Boys and girls?
Boys and girls. I can still remember some of them.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You want to tell us who you remember?
Oh, Joni Madden, she was the best looking girl in our class.
How old was she when you...
About 9.
Yeah? Did you have a crush on her?
I was in love with her.
Yeah.
But Joni never sort of saw me, I don't think. No, they were good. God only knows where they are now. Most of them be dead, I suppose.
What did her father do?
Tom Madden, I don't know. I think he worked somewhere. He had some sort of a good job.
Well, you would have gone to a Catholic school.
I went to Catholic school, yeah.
Okay. Who were some of your other friends?
Oh, there was Spud Murphy. Spud Murphy and I used to go, see, one of those pursuits that you'll probably kids never do now, we used to go raiding birds' nests. There wouldn't be too many kids today going bird nesting, would there?
No.
After school. I'd beat Strugs. But poor old Spud fell out of a tree and landed on his head, and he was never the same, poor fella.
Well, where did you go birds nesting?
Wherever there were trees, sometimes illegally.
No, tell us where.
Like, well, round the railway yards.
Everley?
Round about there, yeah, down there, there's a few trees there. There were a few trees around the church up at Cambertown, you know. There were hoardings along there. It's all changed now, they've got a service station. But there was trees growing along the front of it. Oh, and the university was a great place.
And what sort of birds' eggs would you get?
Well, different eggs. You get sparrows, you get all sorts of stuff, you know. But one of our great happy hunting grounds was the Sydney University. If you lived in Newtown, that was a happy hunting ground.
What
It was
were
all,
they?
well, there were so many buildings. You get in there on a Sunday, you know, and they'd be chasing you, you know.
The security?
Well, yeah, the security. It wasn't very strong. Security wasn't a word that was known then. But there were watchmen.
Yeah.
And, yeah, you used to get booted if you got caught.
Did you have any adventures there?
A few running about the place, yeah.
Tell us.
Well, we got into a place one day where they had all these hockey sticks. I think it was, you know, the students, and we were amazed at, you know, all these paraphernalia. It was like a gymnasium. And we got the hurry up though. The watchman appeared on the scene and he chased us, and it was exciting. Oh, and we used to go stealing fruit. That was really good. I remember as a young kid, very young, we went out stealing fruit, and people used to grow a few trees in those days, peaches and apricots and, you know, things in the yard. And I got caught, and this bloke was a copper, off-duty copper. And I was a little kid, and hell, you never seen a kid go to water like I did. Like, they all got away but me, stupid me, and he grabbed me. And all he did was give me a talking to. But at that age...
How old were you?
Oh, well, I'm only guessing because I was so young. I'm looking at about 5 or 6. I reckon more like 5.
And you'd gone with your brothers?
Gone with my older... See, my older brothers used to regard me as a pest. They used to give me the brush off. And I was not wanted at times, you know. So what I used to do when I was a little kid, I used to give them up. So they called me the Newtown Daily, meaning the paper, you know, the local paper. Because I used to go to Mum and give them up because they'd go and do something that they shouldn't be doing, and I wasn't allowed to go. So I'd copper on them, right? But one thing we used to do, I told you about my father working down on those Centennial Park in those pools. We used to go down there and get these big boards that the men used to push the barrows on. And we were out one day, and Tommy Smith was there, and my brother Frank, and we were paddling these, like making out whether we were in canoes, and I fell off and I couldn't swim. And I was going down for the 3rd time. It's one of the many times, a couple of times in my life that I've been close to death. And I was coming up for the 3rd time and he grabbed me. So
Stop, go on.
Actually a photo here of the wharf where General MacArthur left to come back to Australia in 1942 when the Philippines fell to the Japanese Imperial Army. There I am there. Different scenes. That's the Manila Cathedral. That's Hong Kong. And that's the American City.
You were talking about the time you were at the lakes in Centennial Park and you almost drowned.
Yeah, that was a thing I remember very well, Sue, because I think anything where your life is in danger, it's like moments of great ecstasy in your life, great emotional events like marriage, divorce, death. I was very close to death that day. And only, see, this is a bond I have with that brother, Frank, who's now in a home up at Wollongong. He was in the RAF during the war, and his health has broken down. But that was a shocking experience. That's only kids. Yeah, that was some of the things that happened at that time. Yeah, that wasn't good.
How did you get up there to the Centennial Park? Did you walk?
Well, yes. In those days we had push bikes. All kids had push bikes. A lot more push bikes then than you see.
Even poor kids?
Well, yeah, push bike wasn't dear. A second-hand push bike, if you didn't have one, you stole one. You know what I mean? There is a thing among poverty, among the poor. St. Paul said the poor will always be with it. But I said I didn't know there would be that many. You see, and what we do, you know, if you don't have something, you acquire it. You know, it's well, you know, so be it. You know, you could get around, and I used to ride to the beach. I apologise.
Talking about what were we talking about?
You used to ride to the beach.
Oh no, yeah, and then you'll just take them off after a little bit, just later. So, you used to ride your bike to the beach?
Yes, I used to ride all the way to Coogee which is not far. When you come over across through Erskineville, you know, round the back there, to Coogee Beach. I did a lot of swimming. Swimming, as I say, was an early sport. And there was also football, of course, going to the football. And the cricket in the summer.
I want to go back to some of your adventures that you had with your friends in the neighbourhood where you were doing things that you weren't quite allowed to do.
Well, you know, sometimes you see, kids have always got the rebellious, you know, peer thing. And of course, what was sometimes popular was to break into a factory.
Oh yeah.
And not necessarily steal anything, but make a mess of the factory. See, we are very judgmental, us older people, and yet some of us were just as big a villains.
Well, what are some of the places you broke into?
Well, they're still around probably, so you've got to be a bit careful. There was chocolate factories and smeared chocolate, all poured chocolate into the time machine. In those days they had time machines for punching cards, you know, and you'd find a vat of warm chocolate or something. There was sort of, you know, well, I mean, this wasn't a full-time occupation, but this occasionally happened, you know.
Didn't you
and
eat the chocolate?
Well, of course. You'd knock it off, but you were very careful you didn't get caught with it. But there were things like that, I suppose.
Like what?
See, well, security wasn't as good as it is now. See, today you've got to be very careful if you were. I mean, I'm not a criminal, don't get me wrong, but I mean, security has improved out of sight, you know, alarm bells and
But what other places did you go into?
There was sometimes, you'd break into a factory that had no relative value, you know, like it had nothing, like there was nothing of value there.
Was it boys and girls who would do this together?
Not the girls, no. Not to my knowledge. They may have did it, but not to my knowledge.
So when you hung out with your friends, you'd be hanging out with boys?
Yes. Well, what boys did it for was because there was no other outlet for your, well, I suppose it's to do with the hormones when you're young. The male hormone, you know, you got this aggression.
So there were no sporting clubs or anything?
Oh yeah, well that helped. That took up a lot of time too, yeah. There was skates. Skating.
Where did you skate?
At the Glaciarium.
Where was that?
That was ice skating. Down at Central Railway. Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit?
Well, it was very hard to start to learn, I can tell you. But if you could handle the wheel skates, you know, that used to be out at Leichhardt. There was a place there where you could go. There was also push bike riding, competitive sport. They had a velodrome. Did you know that here?
No, where?
Up in Surrey Hills.
Wow.
And there was a lot of competitive. It was a saucer track. You know a saucer track? And it was sloped. You know, like you've seen the old racing car sloped. And they used to have the competitive. There was an entrepreneur. I can't think of his name now. He used to run it in those days.
How old were you when you were doing, the skating, ice skating and roller skating?
Well, you could say from about 12 onwards.
So when you were younger than 12, you wouldn't be allowed to sort of roam that far?
No, you weren't encouraged to do a lot of things before. Well, there wasn't much money to get the things either, you know.
Was it expensive to go to places like that?
No, things were relatively cheap, but then again, the thing you had to keep in mind was the fact that the rate of pay money wasn't around that much, you know, like there wasn't a high rate of pay. Like my first job was 16 shillings a week. And that was hard work, I can tell you. That was Metta's foundry.
Working as what?
I was helping in the foundry, general hand, you could call it. You know, like doing the castings, and not actually pouring, just helping out, like, you know, like a boy's job, you know.
When, I'd like to go back to when you said your friend fell out of a tree and wasn't quite the same. Were you with him when that happened?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you tell me about that incident?
Well, he climbed a tree. It was a great...
what sort of tree? Where was this?
It would actually happen down in the schoolyard.
Which school?
At St Joseph's, Camperdown.
Yes.
The old schoolyard there. And he climbed this tree and he got up on a branch and he's reaching out for the nest and something happened. And he was never the same afterwards. He fell and hit his head and seriously damaged his brain.
What did you do?
Well, I just did what I normally do under such circumstances. I froze with fear. I was always a frightened child. I think they dropped me in the receiving room because all my life I've had a terrible complex of fear. And things like that immediately sent me into panic.
Did it knock him unconscious?
Yep, yeah.
And did you go and get help?
Yeah, I had to go and get an ambulance, get somebody to get an ambulance. I went to the presbytery, I think, if I remember rightly. Yeah.
And did you get into trouble?
No, the thing was so serious that what had happened was sort of, it wasn't a great crime to start with. So nobody, in the heat of the moment, nobody took much notice of well, we shouldn't have been there, undoubtedly. We should have been doing what we, but nobody took a lot of notice. Of course, things were very cheap. See, you know that there was Selfridges in Newtown. Did you know that?
No, what's that?
Have you ever heard of Selfridges?
You mean the English firm?
They were here.
I didn't know that.
They were in Newtown. And they were like Woolworths. See, Coles, used to have a slogan, nothing over 1 and 6. Did you know that? They were like a dime store in America. Coles. CJ Coles, which is an Australian company, not Woolworths.
Your friend, how you said he wasn't quite the same. How did it change him?
Well, he became, how did any mental aberration, he was lost a lot of his confidence and his studies weren't the same,
Was he slower?
Slower, yeah. He would be almost equivalent to a slightly retarded child, you know what I mean?
And how did that affect his life chances? How did that affect...
Well, that wouldn't be good because the people that weren't retarded at that time were flat out getting a job,
Did you maintain your friendship with him?
No, that we parted after school. See, from there I went to the Brothers and that was another new ball game.
But you were still friends with him at school after the accident?
For a while, yeah, at Camperdown, yeah. Yeah. I can remember a big day at Camperdown School. See, the Brown St Joseph's used to be the nuns there, when the government allocated to Catholic schools radios. And I can remember the great excitement when we went over. They said, go over to the See, I was a pretty big child, and I had to carry this radio over with another bloke, and we had to carry it over to the schoolroom. And that was a big event. We got a radio at school, we didn't even have a radio at home. See, not everybody could, you have to, I don't know, it's a lot of things, I think, includes the wartime. You've got to live through that phase of life to experience what it was about. I mean, you can't really portray it on a screen or even in a picture. You've got to have lived it. It was a real situation. Things were tough. But we eventually got a radio. And I used to listen to all the adventure stories, the adventures of Jimmy Allen.
Was that the late 30s?
Late 30s, yeah, just pre-war.
Did you have any toys? As
a kid, very few. That's the thing, geez, you're pushing some buttons now. I remember as a kid the shop that sold the papers in those days, that'd be the newsagent today, used to sell toys. You don't see that now. But in those days there were a lot of toys, and I can remember there were a lot of toys, and a lot of them were English toys. A lot of stuff came from England. We did a lot of trade with England in those days, all our agriculture and everything. And in return we must have took a lot of their stuff. And I can remember there was PMGs and red fire engines, and we couldn't afford them. But I could afford to look at them, you know what I mean? And there was a tremendous envy of toys. I never had toys. But
what about books?
Well, books you could sometimes get from the library or you can get from school, and I borrowed a lot. But what we did see in the school curriculum, I was in the fourth, for instance, the Christian Brothers, the fourth year reader, and a lot of the books on arithmetic and stuff. You got to remember I had two brothers in front of me. So they'd get the original, the eldest brother, he'd pass it on to Frank, and Frank would pass it on to me, you see. I was at the end of the line, you know, like with the clothes and the books. One of the big events when I first got a job was the fact of buying my first suit. Can you imagine? I bought a suit that didn't come from St. Vinny's or the equivalent, my aunt. It wasn't a handout. You know the day you get your first, you go into a tailor and he runs the tape over you? You know, it's a terrific kick for a kid, I can tell you. You know, like it's a sense of, and yet today a kid probably walk in and get a suit and think nothing of it. You know, everything was a bonus. Because things were tough, and I'm not overdoing it. Things were not good. See, I can remember eating bread and dripping. You ever had that for tea? That's not a very good feed. Golden syrup, do you know what Cocky's Joy? Did you know that we ate heaps of that in the 30s? And this was family food. I'm talking about a family sitting down.
So that was the meal?
That was a meal, sometimes. See, it depended on the father. There was no social service to the equivalent that it is now.
Do you want another drink?
No, I'm okay, look.
Okay.
Do you want a drink?
No, I'm fine, thanks.
What about the young lady? No?
Were there any places that you were not allowed to go, that were forbidden?
Oh, Protestant churches.
Were you allowed to play with Protestant kids?
We weren't encouraged.
What about Jewish people?
Oh no, there was no Jewish.
None around?
No.
What about foreigners, people like not...
Well, there wasn't a heap of them around either. There wasn't a lot of...
no immigrants?
Everyone... Well, I'm sorry. There were very few... foreign people. It was rare.
You didn't have any immigrant friends?
Well, I tell you what, we used to laugh at foreigners in the sense of, did you know that Chinatown, do you know where the name came from, Paddy's Markets? Its origin is derivative of racial prejudice. Paddy's Irish were regarded as nitwits. And the Paddies were originally, the ones that used to do a lot of the dealing in the 20s, were Irish. And the Chinese eventually, they had, see, I can remember Mascot when it was a tin shed. You know, that's a place I used to go on my bike, by the way.
The airport?
Oh, well, see, straight down King Street into Enmore and across a bridge and you were in the airport.
Oh, yes.
And they were the old planes with the open cockpits and you could stand behind them. And you ever stood behind a plane with a prop? You know, not a jet, a prop. You get terrific blast of wind, you know what I mean?
Propeller?
Yeah, propeller blast, yeah. Oh yeah, you could actually stand on the tarmac.
With the planes taking off?
With the planes taking off. You couldn't go where the plane was into the main thrust. But like you could go onto the, where the hangars were.
Did you...
There was joyriding in those days, of course there's still joyriding.
Did you have any friends out there?
No one in particular, no. But me and a mate would get on our bikes and we'd go over there. That was considered a really good day, you know. But the Chinese gardens were there.
At Botany?
At Mascot.
Mascot. And
we regarded the Chinese as more or less the way people... Not that I have anything against Chinese today, but in those days, you know, we used to bait the chows, as we call them. What
does that mean?
Well, we'd go and call them names, you know.
Where were they that you...
They'd be working in their fields.
Oh, down
and they'd chase us.
At Mascot?
And wouldn't we run? And we'd have our bikes, and we'd be off. I tell you what, I improved my riding, I tell you. But that was prejudice, I suppose, which is in all.
What were you going to say about Chinatown?
Well, Chinatown eventually became part of... that was probably the main butt of jokes of a racial characteristic in those days.
Like
you know.
what? Can you tell us some?
Oh, I can't remember exactly, but I know that there was some tendencies to vilify
the Chinese
people. Because they were different. They looked different.
And how would they vilify them?
In jokes, mainly jokes. No, they wouldn't actually insult them to their face.
No.
I don't think they had the courage to do that.
But sometimes some races have jokes, like there's a lot of jokes about Irish people being stupid.
Yeah.
What were the kinds or the nature of the jokes of
It'll
the
be
Chinese?
something of the equivalent.
That they were stupid?
Yeah, and they weren't stupid.
No.
They were very smart business people, which they still are. I reckon they're one of the smartest races of the lot. But because they were physically different.
So they'd make comments about their appearance?
About their appearance. Because of their physical. But
More so than other
But that wasn't a big thing because there weren't that many of them, you know.
Right.
See, and everybody was practically Anglo-Saxon in them times.
Right.
You know, there was Welsh, Scotch, Irish. You had, but nobody else, like, you know, the White Australia policy.
Did you have any adventures at the airport?
No, there was nothing particularly outstanding. There was just a terrific buzz to go out there, to see the planes, you know. To see a flying machine actually was something.
What would have happened if you had come home with a Chinese friend? Was that likely? A kid?
Well, there'd have probably been, you know, we had a mother that was very judgmental. See, we had a Catholic family in our street. I've got to change the venue here to give you an illustration. And I won't mention their names because they may still be alive and see this. But these people had a daughter, one daughter, and they did not regard the rest of us kids as being fit companion for her. And Maria was never allowed to play with us. And my mother used to hate her. Because she didn't like, you know, she was a typical snob that when somebody put the snob on her, she got a little bit resentful, you know. So,
did their father have, Maria's father have a better job, or?
he had a job right through the Depression. See, and that was a terrific advantage. If you had a job and you were able to pay your mortgage and he wasn't a drunk, and to have economic security, you know what I mean? He had a good government job, I forget where it was, I think it was on the tramways or somewhere.
So was it the difference between people with having a job?
That was the judgment stick. And don't worry, people judged on it, you know. Because it affected every part of your life, you know.
How did the teachers treat you at school?
Oh, some of them were good and some were bad.
What do you mean by that? What made a good teacher?
Well, I think a teacher that got your confidence and encouraged you as an individual. There were some teachers that were very sadistic, both nuns and brothers. Very fond of... see, they were allowed to use physical methods of discipline in those days. For instance, the nuns had the cane, and they used to whack into us with it too if we upset them. And not all of them, but some of them.
Was it common?
Oh, it was fairly common, yeah, it was. I mean, if you broke, you know, discipline, where you annoyed them, you'd get a nice whack. And then the brothers had a strap, get a sixer. And I used to get, but then there were many willful children, and I was one of them, you know. Children are not perfect either.
Were you happy at the school?
Happy. No, I don't think I was happy. No, not really. But then I would have been happy anywhere, I don't think, at that stage of life.
Why?
The home environment wasn't happy, so if that's not happy, not much else is happy. You know? I mean, that's where it all happens, isn't it? That's where you live, at home, isn't it?
How did you express your unhappiness?
I used to escape into books. I have a very fertile imagination, and I still love reading.
Well, what sort of books did you read?
I used to read fiction. I didn't like reality. Like, I wouldn't want to read about Al Capone and the St. Valentine's Massacre.
Can you name some of the books?
Oh, Treasure Island.
Oh.
Beautiful stuff, you know what I mean? Stuff that you don't see a lot around today.
Any others?
Well, let's see, oh gosh. There was heaps of books and I just can't... Tom Brown School Days, you remember them?
Yeah.
And
you liked that?
Yeah, well, to me, anything that was an escape, you know. See, I was in a slummy little room down in Newtown, you know, I was in that adventure, you know. Like with Long John Silver and, you know, all that mob, Jim, the guy, the hero, whatever. You know, you can you can escape. You've got to remember, as I say today, kids probably escape into the little machine, the games they play. You know, but in those days we had to create our own fantasy.
Did you get much support from your brothers or sisters? Was there much unity between
My
the
eldest
kids?
brother was a terrific, and still is today, a terrific example to me. He's one of those people that was a real Christian. He not only believed it, he lived it. And he was terrible. He was our father.
Did they look after you?
Yeah. So you got to remember, I had no father figure. And first of all, he died early, prematurely, and then when he was there, he wasn't very much there either. You know, when a father's there but he's not there? But my brother was always there. I could always go to my brother. He didn't always approve of what I did. And I was a rebel.
Okay, getting on to the general neighbourhood now. What sort of neighbourhood was it in Newtown there? Was it a residential? Or?
It was residential and basically working class.
Was there any industry there? Was it
Industry. You've got no idea. You've got no idea how much industry we've lost. Everywhere you looked there was factories.
What kind?
Well, down the road from where I lived, in the street I lived in, was Bonds. That's gone.
A mill?
A huge mill, yeah. There was Brad Mill. They used to make clothes. There was little factories, there was Leighton Platon, there was...
what was the chocolate factory? What was that?
Oh, that was a chocolate manufacturer.
Yeah, named and...
Sweets, I think, was the name of Sweets, or... I can't remember the name. It's a bit long ago.
So the houses mixed amongst the factories?
Yeah, and still are. You can still see the factory there. But of course, they used to manufacture everything. Like, you know, there was heaps of manufacturing. Like Brico piston rings, they used to make them here. We used to make a lot of stuff that's now imported. So this was all small manufacturing.
What was the main business in the area?
Well, I'd say manufacturing, engineering. See, up in Salisbury Road, Camperdown, where now Prince Alfred's got all those factories they've taken over for radium treatment. If you go down there and you walk from King George V straight down Salisbury Road, Camperdown, you'll see all these factories now used by the same factories that were owned by James Kirby. We used to manufacture our own fridges. See, all this stuff comes in from overseas now. Mainly engineering.
Where did most people work?
Well, as I say, a lot of people worked in the factory system. Whether it was clothing or chocolate, sweets, girls worked at the biscuit factory, you know what I mean? Oh, that's another place I used to go for food. Down in Camperdown, opposite the school, in Parramatta Road, was a big biscuit factory. And you used to get broken biscuits, would you believe? You could go and get a bag of broken biscuits for nothing, you know? But they were good. They were good.
What type, you know when you mentioned the engineering establishments, what type of engineering establishment?
Well, there was, Kirby's used to make, James and Kirby, they used to make the Silent Night. Have you heard of the Silent Night refrigerator?
No.
No, well, it's one of the old early type refrigerators, very early models, made in Australia. And there was line boring for crankshafts for cars. Kirby, Doherty and Wicks, they were another big firm there. There was heaps of places. David Jones had a storehouse down in Camperdown. There was chocolate factories. There was clothing manufacturers. See, there was Speedo. You know Speedo, the big knitting mill?
Yeah.
Well, that was up near the Camperdown Park, near St Stephen's, near Australia Street, Camperdown, or Newtown rather.
Okay, can you remember any big events?
Big events, I can remember one big event. They had some sort of a gala on, and they had a wheelbarrow competition. And all the kids had to get their wheelbarrows. Remember I told you that wheelbarrows were a very popular event in those days. I don't know if have you ever seen a wheelbarrow? There was 4 wheels and there was a centre board, and you used to have a piece of string and
You mean a billy cart?
A billy cart, yeah, wheelbarrow. What do I call wheelbarrow? Sorry, billy cart.
Right.
Correct term, sorry. And they had this competition for the best billy cart, and I got that right out of it. And yeah, I won it. But my mother was she put all the decorations, which I considered stupid. And lo and behold, when we got up there, I had a little kid, smaller than me, and I was pretty little, and I put him as the driver, and I pushed it up, and the mayor gave me a prize. And
so it was a sort of a fancy dress Billy came.
yeah, sort of a gala day, you know. They were celebrating some local event. I don't know exactly what it was.
What are the smells you can remember?
The smell, one of the smells as a kid that I can remember, I've never forgotten it.
What's that?
Never forgotten. Have you ever smelt Duco spraying on a car?
No.
Now it's got a distinct smell. And there was a Duco factory near me when I was about 4 or 5. And I used to play on my own, and you know, before even preschool. And I'd go down near the Duco factory. You know, you'll see them rubbing cars down here, doing the work. And there's a smell of Duco. And every time I go near Duco now, you know where they're spraying the cars on, it takes me back to me. It's funny how smells take you back to your childhood. And a chocolate factory had a smell about it. I worked in a chocolate factory later on down at Central.
If I was ask you to name a site, and you think of Newtown, and you think, what's the image that comes into your head?
Of those days or now?
No, those days when you were a child.
Oh, well, there were some very happy occasions. In spite of poor doesn't mean unhappy. I mean, people disassociate, like, they got the idea that to be poor is to be unhappy. I mean, I've always had a pretty optimistic nature, and there were some terrific, enjoyable things. And you've got to remember that life got better.
So can you remember any specific sites?
Sites, as in, events rather than sites. Sites, well, yeah, I've always been impressed by Newtown Courthouse. Is that a site you're thinking of, as of?
Yeah, and what were the other events that you can remember?
The 1935, I think, centenary.
Oh, yeah.
There was, I think there was 150 years we'd been in Australia. And that was struck, there was medallions struck for that, and glassware. I remember at home we had a piece of glass. You know how you get glass and you engrave on it?
Oh, yes.
It was the year I think it was 30, I'm not sure of the year. It was in the 35, I think. And it was the centenary of the Australian, like the bicentenary only was 150 years then.
A bit 38.
38 it'd be, yeah, that's right. And that was a big event. There was big things on the harbour and
anything in
ferries,
Newtown?
and there was fireworks, and there were marches. See, they used to do a lot of marching in them days. You know, like, see, they didn't have the media the way you got it now. So if you wanted to advertise something, you marched. You know, you had or a meeting. You know, up in the Scouts Hall or the, you know, Masonic Club or somewhere, you'd have a meeting. These were part of the processes of.
Okay. Any other events?
Oh yes, one thing stands out of my childhood. Geez, you're pressing the button again. I almost slipped up on this. Was when Jack Lang was going to nationalise the banks.
Oh yes.
And I was with my father, and they had a big meeting in Centennial Park, and within the next week was the elections, and that was federal, right? Now Lang was going to nationalise the banks, but the Englishman, Oppenheimer or something, the financial ex-wizard, he was the one, and the Governor General, they worked a deal like they did on Whitlam. And anyhow, what's his name was voted out anyhow, he wasn't the popular choice. But everyone was convinced. I remember the man had...
Stop. We were talking about events,
yeah.
And you were just talking about, what were you talking about?
The centenary,
yes.
1938, the big centenary. Yeah. Oh, and Jack Lang.
Oh yes.
And
this meeting in Centennial
this big
Park.
meeting in Centennial Park. And my dad was a rabid leftist, and he was convinced that Jack Lang was going to get in, you know, that the world was going to change, that socialism... He was half-baked socialist.
He wanted Lang to get in?
He wanted Lang to get in. Oh. Well, he was the poor man's, you know, John Kennedy at that time. And they wanted Lang to win right or wrong, you know, but apparently the public image wasn't...
What can you remember of that day?
Well, there was terrific excitement, you know, you can pick up on excitement. It's not always that you know what it's about, but you can emotionally feel it. And there was great excitement up there, yeah. And of course in those days there was an obelisk it was in memorial of the Federation of Australia, and there's still a memorial there, but they've changed it. It's no longer the original one that used to be there in 38. But yeah.
What sounds can you remember from that time at Newtown? We're back at Newtown. I'm just going through sights, sounds, and smells. What sounds?
Sound, well, bird sounds. There's a lot of birds around. See, there was a lot. See, when I said that riding bikes was done a lot by young people, we didn't ride on the pavement the way the kids do today, and the sound of birds wasn't uncommon around Newtown because the environment wasn't as polluted. And you've got to remember that the cars were not about. There was very little traffic. I could ride out to Mascot and not see maybe past 4 cars. You know, like, well, maybe I'm exaggerating there, a few more than that. But nevertheless, you know, today you've got streams of traffic, you know. See, and there wasn't the sound of cars, there was the sound of nature, which you rarely hear in the city now.
Can you remember any local characters?
Well, apart from them 2 coppers, I mean, Gorilla, Long Tack Sam.
What was the last one's name?
Long Tack Sam.
Long Tack Sam.
Yeah.
Was he tall?
He was a tall man. Yeah, Long Tack. I wonder if he's still alive, if he ever sees this.
Any other local characters?
Yeah, there was Plonky George.
Who was he?
He was at that stage just the local drunk, in the street drunk, apart from my father. My father was sort of covered, you know, there was a smother.
He wasn't a street drunk?
No, that's right, not as obvious anyhow.
And were people friendly to, what was his name?
George?
Yeah.
Well, not really, he wasn't approved of, because he was a poor, sick, single alcoholic, and there was a character around, but then this is a general character. Can I touch on this? Bondi Mary, have you ever heard of her?
No.
She was a lady that, she was like, you know B. Miles? Well, she was like B, only she'd had a mental breakdown, God only knows, and she lived in a cave at Bondi, and she wore a man's army overcoat from the First War, and that's how she got around. Bondi Mary.
Did she come over to Newtown?
She'd come to she'd turn up anywhere. She used to get on the trams like B, you know. B Miles used to ride on the trams for nothing. They were frightened to go near B. Yeah. B was a real hand grenade with the pin out.
Was Bondi Mary like that too?
No, she was more passive. But
was she tolerated?
Yeah, but she was also picked on. There's always a minority of people that will take advantage of the mentally sick, you know. Treat them as pariahs and lepers.
Did you ever go on any holidays?
Holidays as family? No.
Well, what about just with your mother?
No. No, families weren't on. We didn't have family. We didn't have holidays, I'm sorry.
Well, did you have a holiday just yourself?
No.
No, so.
The first holiday I can remember was when I had my appendix out. They sent me up to a convalescent hospital. No, that's the only holiday.
Where was that?
Well, I went to Prince Alfred, which was just up the road, and it was up at Camden.
And what was this place you went to?
Well, they used to have convalescent hospitals. You don't see them now, do you?
State run?
Yeah, I think they were. They were state run, yeah.
And you were sent there to recuperate?
I was sent there, and I remember that. I enjoyed that. That was beautiful. Like, you know, I saw birds, really. I see nature up there. It's terrific, you know. And the air was better, and the smell of getting up in the morning. It was beautiful.
How long did you stay there?
I was only there a couple of weeks, but it was a beautiful experience. You know, certain things stand out in your childhood, and they haven't much relevance to anyone else, but to you, it was something really, you know, a change from the old industrial suburb.
And you're treated well?
Oh, loving care. They had these nursing sisters, yeah, lovely people.
What was your time like in Prince Alfred?
Great, I enjoyed it. I think that's where I first discovered that I was a hypochondriac. I became a hospital bird after that, I think. No, I did. I really enjoyed my hospital stay. That sounds strange, don't it? But there's one thing about it wasn't very pleasant. In those days, they used to use chloroform, which is ether. Do you know it? And it's much different. Like, since then, I've had operations. And it was, you know, you'd vomit after you come back. And when you drank it, I found out later by my own experience as a drunk, It's the equivalent of getting drunk, because alcohol's a depressant drug. In fact, in the Napoleonic Wars, when they took a leg off a man, you know, in the early days, when they had the cannons that fired ball, they used alcohol as an anaesthetic before Lister. Sorry, that was a lesson in medicine.
Where did most people shop in the area when they did their shopping?
King Street,
Newtown.
Sweet Brothers. The big fire at Sweet Brothers up there years ago. There was Selfridges, there was Coles, but there was Moran and Cato. You ever heard of the firm? They were they in your time? No. They were a large firm of, they were a number of shops that were grocery shops. And on the corner of Mary Street and King Street, Newtown, there was a Moran and Cato's. And in those days, you can visualise this. You went into a shop where behind the shop, if they sold you cheese, for instance, right, you got it in a porcelain-shaped square thing. They used to cover, you know, the cheese, you've seen them? And they'd have string hanging from the roof and brown paper. And everything was wrapped up in brown paper, and they were experts. They could wrap them up and tie it like that. And the money usually in a lot of shops used to go through a vacuum air thing. You know where you put the money in? You see them occasionally in the supermarket, still do it. They've got one down here, in fact, where they put the money in at Wynn's, for instance. Wynn's was a big company. But that wasn't in Newtown, Wynn's. But Moran and Cato's were, yeah. There was a big shop.
And there's still an old one of those vacuum money-taking things in operation.
There is one down here at Food for Less.
Really? Is it an old
but they don't use it for the individual. They, you know, down here at Food for Less, when the girls get too much money in the till, whether it's for security, I don't know, they just take the money out, roll up the notes, say 50s, and they put it in this container and send it up the office.
Oh, right.
It's a security function. But in those days, your whole deal was completed. Say you went to Gowing, which is a very old firm, like, or Wynn's, which is a big historic, Bon Marsh, you remember those names?
Yeah, so the whole transaction would go through that, would they?
That was very popular. Most stores had that. Marcus Clark.
But how would you get your change?
Well, they'd write on the bill.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they'd write your bill. Your bill would go with your money, and it'd go to the cashier up in the heavens, and back would come your change with your receipt.
Right.
Oh yeah, it was all done. Well, not always. Sometimes there were cashiers.
Okay. What's your happiest memory?
My happiest memory of a particular year or day or
Childhood.
Of childhood. Well, strange to say, some of the happiest things I thought was, as a child, was my first communion. Was, you know, it's terrible to have faith and lose it. And I think at that stage I did have a very resounding faith, you know. And I believed I'm very, you know, I wouldn't take a bite to eat, you know, before the communion breakfast, before I had to come in. I was rigid.
Did they have a big celebratory First Communion breakfast?
Yeah, after the business, yeah. We tucked in. I was always a good eater, still am. Like food.
What about your saddest memory? What would be your saddest
When my
memory?
dad died.
How old were you then?
Oh, geez, I was about 15.
Oh.
He died in his sleep.
You never got on with him?
No, but you still can love somebody and not get on with them.
You just didn't wake up one morning?
He didn't wake up one morning. And in those days, they used to leave the body in the house, which was a long weekend. And they had to get salt and put on his stomach. He was starting to go into morbidity, you know. And yeah, that was the saddest day of my life.
So your father, what, did they lay him out in the front room?
Yeah, those days they like had a wake and they put him in the coffin and they had the lid off. And then
that whole long weekend?
Yeah. That was sometimes done, not always.
Was it uncomfortable being in the house?
Yeah, well, there was a smell of death, you know.
There was a smell?
Yeah, there was a smell. I remember the smell of death. It's a strange smell. I've smelled it since. It's particular to the human species. It's distinctive smell. but I didn't know what it was. But I remember it, like you say, do you remember childhood? I remember particularly that in relation to that. That was, I had to go up to the, I remember I went up to T.J. Andrews at the bridge at Newtown, and I had to give the undertaker the date of his birth and death, and I gave the wrong year, so that I had him down for a year younger than he was. But that's the way it was, you know. It was a nasty business. Yeah, that was a very sad day. I remember the flowers. I remember the funeral. I remember I had to throw some dirt on the coffin, you know. And for a kid, I don't think kids should be allowed near the dead. I think it's a macabre thing. But in those days...
Did you get support from the neighbours?
Oh yes, everyone was sympathetic to it. You know, to a degree.
How did they demonstrate their support?
Oh, they sent flowers and stuff, you know, wreaths.
They ever send food and things for the...
There were individual times when some people did, yeah. There wasn't a lot. A lot of people were battling. We weren't the only ones. I mean, there were heaps. Like next door and up the road and everywhere you looked, there was people with problems, you know. Like, it was survival. And when it's survival, it's like being in the Atlantic in an open boat. I mean, it's every man for himself, you know.
What made
if you
you...
can...
I'm sorry.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
I was going to say, what major changes did you witness when you lived at...
In the world?
No, at Newtown.
In what way? In the family life? Or?
Well, no, at Newtown. With Newtown.
Major changes.
Were there major changes in
Well, yeah, I'd say the major changes was employment coming back.
Right.
When the war started to loom and things started to go into... see, things got better before the war, but not as good as they did during the war, because then labour was, in great demand, you know. But it started to pick up, yeah.
And what's your most vivid memory?
Personally, of Newtown,
Or of your childhood?
most vivid one, I suppose, would be, I don't know, there's so many. Leaving school, going to school. Oh, you should have been there the day I went to school. Oh, that was unbelievable. I had to have half the day, Mum had to keep taking me back. Like, they put me in the school and I just cried. And I'd run out of the school, back home, and then take up again. Yeah, boy, I remember that. I'd go to school. Going to work was a big event. These are in my life rather than Newtown, you know. Learning to drive. I learned to drive when I was 14 in that ice truck. Later on I was to borrow my brother's car. He had a 1928 Chev with a soft top. Can you imagine that? And I used to take it for a run. One night I took it out and I got a flat tyre and I couldn't get it home. And boy, was there some trouble. But then I was about 16, so that's later. That's pretty vivid.
This is the last question. When did you leave Newtown?
Well, I went into the army.
In what year?
1941. 41, yeah.
And you never went back to live there?
Yeah, I did after the war for a while. But then I went, I developed my own alcoholism pretty well by then. And I went walkabout. And I was travelling all over Australia. I used to follow the money. I worked on the, the big dam up at the...
Warragamba?
No, not Warragamba, the...
Snowy?
Snowy River.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I was up at Island Bend. But I also worked at League Creek, which is an open cut coal mine. I took on jobs that I wanted to get away from Newtown. You know, like...
Why?
Well, I think you asked me what was the biggest event. The biggest event, I suppose, I wasn't happy there, really. Because you wouldn't want to get away from somewhere where you were happy, would you?
But why weren't you happy?
Well, I don't think we had the best life that we could have had as kids. And I don't blame my parents, because I believe they were victims.
It's a hard time.
See, it's very easy to blame somebody. So you blame your mother and you blame your father. But I don't think they were to blame. They were victims.
of the economic climate?
I believe economics play a big part in... I'll give you an illustration of economics. Can I give you an illustration? See, I had a friend who was in bigot. That's a British occupation force.
What was it? Sorry. It was pretty hard financially. Was it a grim life from the financial perspective?
It was a hard life, yeah.
Not a lot of fun.
Not a lot of fun. I look back now and see kids, you know, that have had a better life. You know, I see them today having a better life. You know, and I don't resent their right to it. I'm just saying that, yeah, it could have been better.
Was your father a veteran of World War One?
No, he wouldn't have joined the British Army for nothing.
Okay. Oh, that's right.
Ah.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank you for your time.
It's been my pleasure.
Okay. It's
Thanks
been
very
very
much.
good. Thank you.
You just hold that up.
Well, do you want me to sit down with it?
That's alright, just keep it still. That's your dad, right?
That's me, Dad.
Alright.
Me mother. Everyone's close to their mother. Is the reflection all right?
Yep. So that's you and a girlfriend at
And
the
a
time.
girlfriend at Taronga Park.
And
You want to go down one?
That's you again.
That's me again. That's taken at... we got sound on, have we?
Yep.
That was taken at Circular Quay, opposite where McDonald's is now. It used to be opposite the back of the customer there. Oh, that's playing up at a picnic. In those days, we used to go away to guest houses for holidays. And that's a guest house there. See where we are with them young ladies?
And which ones are you there?
I'm there.
Which? Oh, right, the one on the end.
Yeah, and the other bloke's me brother. Two young ladies we met there. And that's me again at the bottom.
Right.
Not too many